Welcome to this session, this HR Heroes 2022. Some of you may well be aware that this was something we started last year, and it really came out of the pandemic and people having experienced lockdown, and LHH recognising that, of course, the HR community had to work incredibly hard in managing all of the complexities of home working, well-being, belonging, and us wanting to give back by way of development for individual HR folk who often are there for everybody else in the organisation, but not on the receiving end of that development. So HR Heroes started in 2021. We got a really positive reaction and uptake to those sessions. And as a result, we've decided that we are going to do it again. And so we ran our first session yesterday in person. So that was our first HR Hero session in person, which was fantastic. Gave us the opportunity to really build those networks and connections. And we're delighted to be here today to run a virtual session where we hope to meet a broader number of people and reach more of those who weren't able to be there yesterday. And we're looking to really use this session to share our thinking in this space. So I'm going to just introduce myself, albeit very briefly. My name is Colette Andrew Arthur. I'm a principal consultant and occupational psychologist at LHH. I've been at LHH since 2014, and I've been in talent and leadership development for about 17 years. Fostering inclusion and talking to clients about inclusion is one of those areas that I love to get involved in. I seek it out where I can, and so really delighted to be here to be able to share our thinking in this space and to hear from each of you as we get the opportunity to really hear about your experience in this space. So as you're joining, if you do pop yourself on mute. So this session, we're going to look at defining an inclusive workplace. And that might feel a pretty simplistic place for us to start, but we want to really expand what we might think about inclusivity. And we want to think about what it really means. And so we're going to share some of our perspective around that and also get a little bit from you in this space. We're going to look at what are some of the possible headwinds that slow down organisations' progression towards an inclusive culture. And we're going to give you an opportunity to hear from each other in that space. And then we're going to move towards looking at what fosters inclusion, and specifically looking at leaders, leader behaviours, and how we might define what an inclusive leader would do to be successful in this space. And we hope by going through those sort of three key areas that we will give you some threads to maybe pull on after today's session to continue your thinking and to give you some key takeaways that might provoke further conversations back in your organisation. We appreciate that this session will meet people at different points in their journey on inclusivity. So of course, we know that when we speak to clients, everybody's trying to do something in this space, it feels at the moment, but there are varying degrees of readiness and openness in terms of where people are in meeting with inclusivity and what it means to each organisation. So we hope that wherever you are in joining this conversation, it will give you some additional perspectives by which you can move the dial a little bit further for your own organisation and yourself in this space. And so we hope that's going to be really useful to you. Of course, we are a broader group and we join from different organisations. So we do ask that this space is a confidential and safe space, particularly as we encourage you to share maybe on the chat and the use of the poll. So we'll do that with no judgment and obviously confidentiality. Okay, good. So you heard there that we're going to be making use of the Zoom poll function and the chat function to really get your involvement and hear from you in this space. I am going to try and stretch myself into a perhaps uncomfortable place today and use Mentimeter. So some of you may be very well versed in that. It's something that has been around, I know, for quite some time now, and I've made best attempts to avoid it, but today I've decided I'm going to face into it and have a go at using it. So let's wish me luck in that actually works well for us. If that fails on its first attempt, we will revert back to the Zoom chat function, which is where I'm always comfortable. Good. All right, lovely. So let's give ourselves a bit of a focus in this area by starting with some statistics. And as I mentioned, COVID really seemed to do something to sharpen the focus around organisations' attempts to build a sense of belonging, maybe by the fact that people have remained largely in a hybrid scenario, working from home and in the office. It's really, for us, shown that organisations are having to really think about this space of what does it mean to create an inclusive work environment, and how far does that go? And it's not surprising that there's been recent studies published with statistics around inclusivity. And I wanted to start there because I think some of them really do sharpen the lens through which we might think about inclusivity. So the first statistic I'm going to put up here is 50%. And some of you may be hazarding a guess in your own mind at the moment what that might refer to. And so latest research is telling us that as many as almost 50% do not feel very included in their organisation. So you'll forgive me for rounding this up. It was something like 48, 49%. So almost 50% are not feeling very included, which is particularly sobering when you consider what that might mean for those individuals that have rated that way. So a proportion of those, of course, will be feeling particularly excluded. And again, a proportion of that will be perhaps even feeling lonely. So a significant proportion of our organisations not feeling that they have a place where they feel that they belong. And of course, that has connotations for many other things such as engagement. We do know that, of course, those individuals that feel more included are also higher in terms of their engagement and, of course, performance as a result. The other statistic then is 1.5 times. And so when we think about this, we know that there are those who feel included are 1.5 times more likely to perceive that their careers are outpacing that of their peers. So there is a real implication for how inclusivity affects people's sense of career progression and their sense of advancement in an organisation. Building on from that then, it also has impacts on people's decisions in terms of joining an organisation. So 40% or 2/5 have admitted to turning down a job in an organisation because of the perceived lack of inclusivity. So what we're seeing here is, of course, inclusivity and its perception is really affecting the employee value proposition of organisations. So it's much broader than just an individual well-being factor. It is, of course, really important from an organisation attraction of talent factor as well. And then the final statistic that I just wanted to share with you was 6%. And so this is either going to be very positive when it's low, isn't it, or very concerning. And unfortunately, it's the latter. So only 6% feel that their organisations are doing enough in this space or too much. So again, a large proportion of individuals rating their organisation as simply not doing enough in this space to create that sense of inclusivity. So I hope that's got you thinking. You've maybe scribbled down some of those statistics. They might make for a good talking point back in your organisation if you're making a case for why this matters. And hopefully this has helped somewhat in framing it for us. So I'd love just to get a few introductions going on the chat. So just to get a sense of who's joined us in the session today, if you could pop your name, organisation, perhaps where you're located. We may be globally dispersed today, or we may be more nationally located. It would be great to know where people are dialing in from. But what in particular maybe has brought you to this session? Maybe there's a bit of a burning platform for you. Maybe this is just an area of interest and just broadening your awareness. So it'd be great to hear from you on the chat, and I'll keep my eye on that as that comes through. Lovely. Nice to see you, Anna, Jenny. Thank you for joining. Lovely. And hopefully for each of you, this is also really helpful. If you keep your eye on the chat, there may be some people that you already know, and small world, we cross paths more frequently than we maybe expect to. So, and this may be a start for you to, as we go into breakouts, you may well be able to connect perhaps on LinkedIn afterwards. Wonderful. Great to see you all. Thanks for joining. Good. Okay. Really nice, and really nice to see a range of industries, organisations. Of course, we've got people at different levels in HR across the organisations that are joining, wanting to learn more. Good. Well, I hope whatever it is that's brought you to this, I hope that, of course, that you get, as I say, some threads to pull on. So I'm going to make our first attempt at using Mentimeter, and I want us to think about what you need as an individual to make you feel included. So what is it that helps you to feel part of an organisation? And so I've put the Mentimeter link here and the QR code. So please make use of that, and we'll have a little attempt at building a word cloud for what it is that helps people to feel included. So if you take a moment just to use that QR code, I don't know if that's gone for you a bit too quick. Does anybody need that popping back up? Perhaps I maybe have been a bit quick on the, yeah, supportive colleagues, understanding, great, being heard, empathy, curiosity. Oh, I'm pleased to see that word. People that look like me, representation. Fantastic. Super. Role models. Great one. Excellent. I'm going to perhaps put up that QR code again if anybody did need it. Maybe was a bit quick to share. So anybody that hasn't had a chance to take it down, what do you need to make you feel included? Did you sense a sigh of relief as I've managed to show the word cloud actually works and I could share it? I won't be able to stop myself now. Mentimeter is going to be a feature. Brilliant. I've surpassed myself already. We're rocking and rolling. It's all good. Okay, so hopefully everybody's managed to use the QR code. So I will now bring up that word cloud and share where we have got to with that. Looking good. Authenticity, lovely. Celebrating difference, personal connection. Some great words here, some great, really descriptive and really triggering words, aren't there, in terms of what they mean to us. So flexibility, compassion, really, really strong words for us to look at. So we'll send this on afterwards along with the slides so that you have a copy of those words and what people need. And again, maybe something that you want to do in your own organisations to get a sense of what individuals need in your own organisations. But one of the things that comes out, certainly as we look at that, is how individual it is for people. And again, research is telling us that regardless of gender, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, that actually everybody reports barriers to feeling included at some points in their career. So it isn't a minority issue, it is an organisation-wide issue, and it is an issue for everybody. And the complexity, therefore, is obviously built into the fact that everybody needs something different. And it can be really simple things that make the difference as to whether that somebody is feeling included in their organisation. And I'll just share an example, and it came up in a conversation with a client the other day where they had been through quite a lot of significant change over a number of years. Lots of different leadership changes have happened. And actually, the way, therefore, that the organisation celebrates achievements, the way the organisation engages in social activities has changed over time. But actually, somebody had come to HR to say, over time, the way in which their inclusion has been affected has been positive, because the way social activities have now been framed has changed. So once upon a time, it was very much a pint in the pub after work, after hours. And that had felt quite excluding for that individual and had felt quite specific to a certain group of interests. Whereas now it's much more an afternoon activity within team events, where there is much more of a buffet style of food and drinks available, and it feels much more inclusive. So it's really interesting just to hear a very simple and small example of how something based on a social activity can really have quite a large impact on whether people are feeling included or not. So let's just start to think about how we might define inclusivity then. So put up this definition here, which we use in LHH in one of our modules. I'll give you just a moment to read that. And perhaps as you read it, I'll invite you to pop into the chat any words that are maybe jumping out at you, or any reactions you're having to that. Maybe it sits really comfortably with you as a definition. Maybe it expands where your organisation thinks about inclusion already, or maybe it doesn't go far enough. Maybe there's some things in here that you'd want to see amended or added. So pop into the chat any reactions you're having to that definition. What are your thoughts as you read that? Equal access, yeah. Equal equity or equality, lovely. Treated fairly, yeah. Those words calling out for you. Great. Applies to all, right conditions in place, yeah. That's caught a couple of people's attention there. Lovely and valued. Good. So you're right, there are some key words obviously that we're paying attention to in there: valued, treated fairly, equal access. I think you're calling all of those ones out. But actually, as we came to this just recently, there's some thinking that we often talk to our clients about that aren't captured in here. And I thought I'll call this out and I'll share it with you to really expand how we might think about this. So the first thing I wanted to share is that actually diversity is not equal to inclusivity, albeit it often gets pulled into the same definition. But of course, diversity is about representation, and inclusivity is much more than that. And so whilst diversity is necessary, it's not sufficient in and of itself to create that inclusive work environment. And so we wanted to just share with you that actually it's not about just diversity. It's about how we maximise the power of our differences. And this slide for me is a wonderful share in workshops, and individuals really enjoy seeing what we really mean by this. So exclusion being perhaps not invited to a party, diversity therefore being invited to the party, so having a representation there, but not invited to dance. You'll see where this is going. So inclusion then being asked to the party and maybe asked to dance, but not staying until the end. And then building on inclusion, really starting to think about a sense of belonging. And therefore, if we sort of take this story of the party forward, very much being, this is my kind of party and I'll stay till the end. And so we really like to use this as an analogy to talk about how we can build on the idea of inclusion to be much more than being part of, but feeling a strong personal connection through a sense of belonging. And so I'm going to just pull that thread a little bit further, actually, to say, well, maybe it's a little bit more than just belonging, because again, when we speak to clients and we speak to individuals, we know that people want to feel more than a sense of belonging. People want to feel that they are understood for who they are, and that was on our word cloud. People want to feel that they're known for their likes, their dislikes, their preferences, what matters to them. And so we start to think about this term uniqueness. What makes this individual unique? And people want to feel that they're understood and recognized for that. So I'm going to go a little bit theoretical for us here and do this 2 by 2, because that's always quite nice to expand our thinking in this way. So high belonging, high uniqueness, we get inclusion. That makes sense. Individuals treated as an insider and encouraged to retain their uniqueness within the work group. Low belonging, low uniqueness, we get exclusion. So hopefully you're all with me and this is feeling like it's sitting comfortably. So not treated as an organizational insider with unique value, but there are others who are. And so that's the point at which we get that sort of sense of feeling excluded. But as I come to this, I start to think about women in leadership. It's another passion of mine, and I do a lot in that space for clients, both delivering and managing projects. And as I talk to clients about women in leadership, there are certain topics that come up as we start to think about maybe implementing some programs. And the first thing that strikes me is that many organizations we speak to are perhaps high on uniqueness in terms of recognizing the value of women in senior leadership positions, but perhaps have low representation and so low belonging in that space. So we see lots of clients in this space of differentiation, making a statement about the value, but wanting to get to a place of inclusion, not having yet reached that high belonging. And then there is assimilation, so high belonging, low uniqueness. And so if we follow this example of women in leadership again through, this might be those clients for whom they do have women represented on their senior leadership boards. But when we speak to those women, what they're reporting is that they don't feel able to be their authentic, unique leadership self to be heard. They feel they're having to conform to perhaps a cultural expectation of what leaders look like in the business. And often that is conforming to maybe a male stereotype that isn't their unique, authentic self. And so one of the sort of barriers often to inclusivity initiatives is that they try to build assimilation rather than true inclusion. And so what we want to do is try and move and nudge towards that uniqueness as well as belonging. And so particularly as we think about this example of women in leadership, one of the things we have to try and do is ensure that organizations understand that a women in leadership program is not about fixing the woman, but actually it's about tackling those unique headwinds that women face in order to be able to bring their unique and authentic selves to truly belong in the organization. So I share that as an example to try and sort of bring to life this quadrant, and hopefully that's maybe done something in pulling forward this idea of inclusion being much more than just about belonging, but being about uniqueness too, and the ways in which we talk about it. We're going to move on to think about the headwinds to creating an inclusive culture. And I'm going to ask Deo, our producer, to launch a poll. I'd like you to think about how you would rate your organization's level of inclusivity. Perhaps you consider it to be truly part of your culture where you are today, and maybe you would therefore rate you a 5. Perhaps actually the reason that you're here is because there's really a very steep hill for you to climb in your organization and you're rating yourself a 1. So Deo, if I could ask you to launch the poll, and as I say, we do this without judgment, but it would be interesting just for us to see where everybody is. Super. All right, so as you can see, we have a predominant number of us sitting in the middle. So maybe having made some gains in this space, but not having gone as far as we need to in order to feel truly satisfied that it's part of the organization's culture. Not surprisingly, we've got some 1s and 2s. And to our delight, of course, we've got some 4s, which means we're obviously making some good gains in that space. So if anybody is is willing to share perhaps why they gave their organisation the number that they did. You don't have to share which organisation you're from, but I'd be very open to anybody coming off mute if they'd like to share perhaps why they gave the number that they did. Is there anybody that's got a particular strong example of maybe the barriers that they're facing or any of the gains they've made that's led to the rating they've given their organisation? You pop your hand up and Deo or yourself can take you off mute. If there isn't anybody, that's no problem. We can skip on. Karen, thank you. You've raised your hand. I think you can take yourself off mute. Love to hear from you. What number did you give yourself?
Good morning. I gave us a 2, just to signal that we have got the direction of travel set, yes. But and great intent and lots of conversation, but as yet very little action or it yes. feeling any different. So that was why I went for a 2.
Yeah, lovely. And if we tie it back to maybe the quadrant that we were just looking at, it sounds like you're in that differentiation stage where you've sort of made a statement around the direction of travel, but of course there's, as you say, the action to follow to maybe move that differentiation over to inclusion. Lovely.
Yeah. And I think on your quadrant and your example about women in leadership, we recently had a day with 40 women leaders and aspiring leaders, and I think they're definitely their lived experience is that assimilation quadrant. Yes. Yes. So yeah, we need to work with everybody, including the male leaders, on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. Great share. Brilliant. If there's anybody else that wanted to come off mute and share, very happy to hear any other examples of where you placed yourself, perhaps how that's looking in your organisation. Okay, maybe we'll give you a chance to share in smaller groups. It's sometimes a little bit easier to do that. So we're going to start a breakout group. We're just going to give 5 minutes. Of course, we are a big group and we're short on time. We'd love to give you longer, but we're going to give you 5 minutes in groups of about 5 to talk about the headwinds that get in the way of inclusivity in your workplace. What are some of the things that maybe are slowing down your progression? And I'm going to ask you to really come back with maybe 1 or 2 points that a spokesperson from your group can share, and we'll ask 1 or 2 of you to come off mute and be ready and prepared to share what were some of the themes that were discussed. So Deo, if you could launch the breakout group. Good. So as you come back from the groups, some of you, I think, got a bit confused about what we were doing. We were talking about maybe the headwinds or the barriers, or challenges that get in the way of organisational inclusivity. So if you haven't had chance to share your view in your group and you want to use the Mentimeter to add to the thoughts around today's session in terms of what you've seen get in the way of inclusivity, what are some of those challenges or headwinds, then use the Mentimeter link that's on the screen now. As you're doing that, is there anybody in the groups that were in the breakouts that had identified a spokesperson to come off mute and just share verbally what were some of the things you discussed? Raise your hand if there's anybody that wants to just play back maybe 1 or 2 of the things that were discussed in terms of what gets in the way.
I got volunteered from our group, who was group 1. I think that was only because I had a pen in my hand ready. Yes, so we discussed mindset of managers, not having time to make the change. We discussed length of service and how, you know, if you've got a structure that's predominantly males and the long servers, then it's not allowing that diversity to filter through. You know, if you reach a certain age, then you're more likely to stay with the company. So it's blocking that diversity. So length of service is great. And people, you know, it's great to think, you know, you've got an average length of service of 12 years, but is it blocking that diversity coming through?
Yeah.
Unconscious bias at employment, we recognise that, you know, you do tend to side with people who are similar to you.
Yeah.
So that again is a blocker for diversity maybe coming into the work environment. And also we discussed the norm in leadership. Rather than, you know, recognizing people's uniqueness, it's getting that change from what we've visualized the normal of what leadership looks like.
Yeah, fantastic. And gosh, you had a great discussion in 5 minutes. What a lot that you covered. So thank you for sharing. That's excellent. Yes, so many things in there that you've talked about. So, and many of them, you're right, we hear a lot of similarity in our experience. So time, leadership culture, preparedness to change the dialogue around this, and sometimes even a wariness to get into this space, to build on what you've said. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else with maybe some builds or any different points to bring to the discussion around what slows down inclusivity or areas to be minimized as we try and move the dial?
Colette, it's Jenny Cooper here.
Hi, Jenny.
With our group, we had very similar conversations, but I guess this is personal for me. That the other thing that I mentioned was working in a really small organisation. You get to talk to lots of people about this, but you end up with almost a set of very individual views. So trying to find, you know, the right tactics or the right actions to take to create inclusivity can be quite different because everybody wants something different, as we highlighted at the beginning. So that's I don't know if that quite falls in the barrier, but it makes it quite hard to prioritise, makes it quite hard to action plan.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very very relevant and very pertinent. Yes, absolutely. It is sometimes so individual, and as you say, in a much smaller organization, hard to then pull the commonality together to find the themes there to build on. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to have a look to see if we have a Mentimeter to share a whiteboard. So let's have a look at what we've got going there, and then we will move on to, I don't think there was anybody that added to the Mentimeter, so no problem. All right, so let's go back to the slides and we will continue with our conversation in this space. So some of the things that we would pull forward, and it really has been covered in the discussion, but bias, unconscious bias, leadership culture have all been mentioned. Low levels of trust and psychological safety really coming up for us as an organisation talking to clients at the moment. So that really is impacting people's feelings of inclusion. And so where there's low levels of trust and psychological safety, obviously it follows that people are feeling particularly low in sense of belonging, and low in terms of value. Interestingly, research is showing us that it's as simple as sometimes a mismatch between what an organisation is espousing in terms of what they value and what individuals think that they bring in terms of their individual competency and value. So, you know, organisational changes can have a huge impact on feelings of inclusion, because, you know, if the direction is changing from what individuals have been used to contributing in terms of their value, that can really really impact a sense of belonging too. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, we do know that, for example, women, ethnic minorities, certain race and you know, inequalities can experience more microaggressions and feel more excluded from social activities at times, and also feel that they experience more derogatory comments and jokes. So that, of course, is concerning and needs to be addressed. But equally, as we know that regardless of those demographics, all people report feeling barriers to inclusion at times. So when we think about building inclusion, we talk about these three areas: culture, organisational practices, and behaviours and mindset. I'm not going to go into each of these. Of course, we could run half a day on each and every one of these aspects in here. We'll send the slides on afterwards. I'm going to call out, you know, if we talk about cultural initiatives, I know that I think it was Joanne, you perhaps shared sort of unconscious bias, of course, running workshops in this space, having inclusion and diversity committees, having town halls, can all build the culture towards inclusion and create the right sort of space for inclusivity to happen. organizational practices, having some really clear statements around inclusivity and that it matters to the organization, of course, really sets the tone and outlines the expectations. And then, of course, behaviors and mindsets. We're going to come on to talk about leaders in particular in terms of creating that cultural space that is in line with inclusion. In your handout, we've given you space to really reflect on this, knowing that we haven't got time to talk about it in today's session. We want you to maybe take this away as an opportunity to reflect on what your organisation is doing for each of these areas successfully. And perhaps maybe in your breakout group, there were ideas that you want to capture and try as you think about this space. So we'll encourage you to use that handout. And of course, if you can connect on LinkedIn with each other and maybe continue the conversation, that would be great. But I'm going to nudge us into thinking about the leadership culture. And of course, we know it starts at the top. It requires ownership. And of course, when we think about the role that leaders play, so huge in shaping the culture. And I think these two quotes here are particularly powerful, but certainly the blue one certainly captures the attention in particular. And so we know that, what leaders say, what they do shapes the culture. And of course, the culture is made up of conversations and behaviours that leaders tolerate and reinforce. And so it's really important that we start to think about inclusive leadership and what does that look like. And again, the research tells us that it matters. We know when we look at research of individuals who rate their inclusive leaders, that they are higher on performance, productivity, collaboration, and innovation and creativity. So it has real business impact, and it really does matter. But then what is it that those leaders are doing to be considered inclusive? What are the behaviours of those inclusive leaders? So I don't know if you want to add to the chat your ideas of what you would expect to see in an inclusive leader. It would be great to perhaps have a list of behaviours that you might expect if you were defining an inclusive leader. It'd be great to hear from you in the chat what you might expect. Emotional intelligence, lovely. Thanks, Jenny. Yes, great one. Empathy, role model. Yeah, good. Thank you. Nice to see that there. It's important, isn't it, to recognise the role that leaders play in and the shadow that they cast. Respect, listens to all. Kindness, yeah, patience. Gosh, what a powerful word. When we think about what that means, yeah, patience to understand and respect. Self-awareness, yes, indeed. Good. And I'm sure there's many others. You may be starting to look at the what else there might be. Vulnerability, super. So here's the list that we come up with, and it is fairly extensive and it touches on all of the points that you've made. So of course, self-awareness of themselves, their own biases, the assumptions that they make. Deep curiosity about others, that came up on our word cloud earlier, curiosity. And it's important that they have a genuine interest, isn't it, to understand what makes people tick and what makes them unique. Making it a personal priority, I've called that out here, because of course leaders do need to be able to step up and speak out when they see exclusion happening. They need to find ways to counter their own stereotypes, and perhaps in terms of delegating as an example, using that as an opportunity to foster inclusion. Listening without judgment, admitting mistakes and showing vulnerability. So again, when we talk to organisations, one of the things that comes up often is a wariness to get into this space for fear of leaders making a mistake, perhaps setting hairs running. And we know that this space moves rapidly. We know that it's changing rapidly, and leaders are sometimes nervous to go into the D&I space for fear of actually getting it wrong. But actually being able to step into this space and show vulnerability, that they may sometimes make mistakes, but that they're willing to learn, and that there is a humbleness to that, actually goes a long way in building that sense of inclusion. And of course, encouraging divergent thinking and creating space for others to contribute And I thought that was beautifully captured with the word patience, perhaps there earlier. So when we look at sort of, I suppose, grouping that very long list of behaviours, we like to group it according to these 4 areas. So self-awareness, and as we've described here, self-awareness to very much be aware and alert to their own style and preferences, and also being alert to that of others. We also talk about curiosity, so being able to uncover and inquire about what matters to others. Open-mindedness, listening at multiple levels, so really understanding and being open to counter stereotypes, so actually being deliberate in paying attention to things that will challenge their thinking, that will expand their approach. And of course, identifying, as we talked about diversity being kind of a necessary, identifying those diversity gaps to build that initial representation. So being quite deliberate in their attempts around that. So those are the 4 quadrants that we talk about. And as I think about those 4 quadrants, we wanted to bring to you the opportunity to reflect on your own inclusivity, because we all bring our own lens to the world. And so as we think about developing you in this HR Heroes session, we wanted you to think about yourselves as agents for change, and role model was a word that was used just a moment ago. So to what extent do you role model that inclusive leader list of behaviours? Are you happy with, as you read that list, do you espouse those? Do you role model those yourselves? Or perhaps there's 1 or 2 areas that you want to change or do more around or reinforce, so that others recognise that in you more clearly. Perhaps there's unconscious bias sitting in your team that needs addressing. Perhaps there's some untangling of impact and intent. So as you kind of just take a moment to reflect on the list that we had and those quadrants, maybe think about those adjustments that you need to make. And again, in your handout that was in the chat, we've given you a chance to rate yourself, a bit of a self-reflective activity on the back of today. But of course, this is a survey that you could send out to your leaders to get a sense of your leadership culture in this space. Perhaps it would help you to identify, for those of you that are looking to identify the thread, is there a thread in here that would help you define where you need to start in terms of building inclusivity in your organisation? Okay, so we're moving towards just sort of wrapping themes up. And I thought I'd just pause to share some of the examples that we're seeing with our clients. And mitigating unconscious bias, unsurprisingly, is something that remains incredibly popular as a starting point to tackle inclusivity in organisations. But it also has moved into a space, as I say, around talking about building trust and psychological safety. And very much more so recently, with the pandemic and with organisations trying to now rebuild a sense of team belonging, we find ourselves really working in this space of team effectiveness and team coaching to really build that sense of understanding, compassion and inclusivity across teams, particularly where there may be silos that have set in, and people feeling excluded as a function of maybe physical distance. And of course, building self-awareness in leaders is always starting point for any of those initiatives. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the ways in which we can support and work. But I think there's an opportunity for you as we sort of bring it back to yourselves, and you may think about rating yourself. One thing that you might ask for to change or to influence to feel more included in your own organisation, what would make perhaps the difference for you? And what one thing might you do on the back of today to help somebody else feel more included, perhaps in your team, perhaps in somebody else's team, but what could you do to support somebody's sense of belonging in your organization? And that might give you perhaps a frame to do just one small thing. We talk in LHH about making a difference one person at a time. And that's quite a powerful way to think of, like a sort of snowball effect. Sometimes it can feel too big to, you know, to bite it all off in one go, but actually to one person at a time. And so maybe thinking about who you might make the difference to one person at a time in this space is a nice way to take it away. So let's just reflect on, as we come to sort of final straight, some of the things we want you to sort of take away from the session. One is that inclusivity, of course, is a business priority. It affects well-being, creativity, and performance. We know that it's more than just belonging. It is about uniqueness and belonging. And in creating that sense of uniqueness and belonging, we know that there are different phases that we can go through in terms of inclusion, exclusion, differentiation, and assimilation. Organisations are facing several headwinds, and that's what makes this so complex. It is individual, and understanding individuals to build those organisational programmes is important. Many organisational initiatives do fail if they focus on assimilation, because it misses that part about uniqueness. And I think that's quite a powerful message to kind of land as you think about perhaps why maybe some things haven't gone as well as you would hope, if you're reflecting on any initiatives. Leaders play obviously a critical part in setting the culture for inclusion. And so ensuring that your leadership culture is open-minded, self-aware, deeply curious, and deliberate in action are the bedrocks of that leadership culture. And finally, of course, it takes everybody. As we know, this sits with everybody. It's not just HR's role, it's not just the talent role, it is the role of everybody across the organisation to build that sense of inclusivity. And so I'm going to ask, I've got a video to play you as you leave the session. I'm going to play you Apple's organisational video that lays out their intent in this space. It may be one you've seen. It's a great one to kind of consider again how inclusivity is framed and how it's talked about. So I'll do that in just a moment. But before we do, it'd be great to hear what's the biggest insight that perhaps you're taking from today, something that's landed with you well, maybe an action that you're going to commit to taking, but what's sat comfortably with you. Love to hear from you in the chat. Uniqueness, yeah. Good, yes. So that uniqueness as well as belonging, really landing with people. Yeah, that differentiation. Excellent. Everybody's responsibility, everybody is unique. Yes, lovely. As you continue to type in the chat, I'm going to share this video, and hopefully again, it will prompt you in terms of your thinking around this space.
Open. Open a door and it opens all the others. Open a mind and see what happens next. No great thing, no beautiful invention was created in a vacuum. It happens when we leave our comfort zone and come together. Embrace faiths, cultures, disabilities, differences. Embrace races, ages, ideologies, personalities, creating a tool or device nobody saw coming. Humanity is plural, not singular. The best way the world works is everybody in, nobody out. So who we're made of is everyone. Differences, not just celebrated, but essential. Many more women in charge, equal pay for equal work, everywhere. A new generation of Apple, more diverse than the one that came before. Open is not just who we are, but what we believe as a company, because humanity isn't singular, it's plural. The truth is, we don't see things the same. The power is, we don't see things the same.
So hopefully that landed with some more thoughts for you to consider. As we leave today's session, I thank you very much for your contributions. I hope it's been of use in your thinking in this space. I'm very happy to connect outside of today's session. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to support you in any of your thinking or answer any questions that we haven't had time for, but I thank you for your participation. Thank you. Thanks for the comments in the chat. That's great. Thank you.